Cool. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So, so this I'm gonna put in the chat, but this is a presentation actually that HL7 put together on FHIR bulk data API. I want to talk to just kind of high level overview of it initially, and then we'll jump into using some of the REST APIs. So the purpose behind the FHIR bulk data, and they have their own stuff. I'm just going to kind of jump around a little bit. But the intent of the FHIR APIs, right, is a patient can talk via FHIR to the resources, and a patient can get data out, or maybe users can get data out. But if you want to be working with like population data or getting metrics across a whole group of people, that's where the bulk data API works. Or if you need to do any kind of archives or backups, the FHIR bulk data API specification is intended to allow you to extract data across many, many patients. And because of that, it has a lot more security restraints and requirements to be able to make sure that that data is not being leaked and it's being done in a safe and secure manner. So there's lots of different use cases for it, as I already talked about. I'm just going to skim over that. And I want to just go through the technical implementation. So if you actually try to go to HL7's website for the Smart FHIR, you'll find that they've changed the main website to be like this homepage, and they've changed a lot of it on this ballot too. Let's just go to bulk FHIR here. FHIR bulk export. So they've gone through and changed a bunch of stuff here, but the thing is that what we use in OpenEMR is called FHIR bulk data STU1. That's the one that everyone's being validated against and ONC is certifying against. There's a couple additional things that have been added in the latest version of the bulk export, and I'll highlight those, but we don't currently support those in FHIR. But let me just explain a little bit how this works from a flow. So in bulk FHIR, it's going to kick off a request to the bulk FHIR server, right? That request is going to send as part of its HTTP GET request a prefer header with the respond async. And it's going to send a request to 3 different types of endpoints. One to the patient endpoint, if you want to get data on all patients. That's stuff that's in the FHIR patient compartment. We didn't talk about this in our previous FHIR presentation, but there's a concept in FHIR called a compartment. And if you want to see just data that's relevant to FHIR and maybe, or not to FHIR, but to a patient, rather than something to an organization or to the EMR itself, then you can grab that data via the patient permission here in this patient operation endpoint. If you have a particular group that you want to grab data from, then you can give a group ID and you can do an export. And currently in OpenEMR, the only groups that we support is on a particular provider. We haven't built in, but we're open for people to do pull requests or make extensions modules for this. But you can, if you want to grab all the patients that are assigned to a particular provider, you can do that via the group export. And then if you want to just export everything in the entire server, then you can hit the FHIR server base and hit this export URL. Okay. There's a couple things that you can specify in terms of parameters that you can. This is in the V2 version. We don't support the since. But you can specify the output format, which has to be the MD-JSON right now. You can specify what types of FHIR resources you want. So maybe you only want patient resources or encounter resources or observation resources. And then we have this type filter, which we don't currently support. It's optional experimental. But the type filter, when we add in support for that, will let you get narrowed down to a specific LOIN code. So I want to export only observations that have, blood pressure, the code for blood pressure, things of that nature. And then I'm going to skip that V2. So what's going to happen after you get that kickoff request is that the FHIR server is going to tell you, because this is all happening asynchronously, if the server is going to be processing millions of records or tens of thousands of records, it may take a while to do that. And so in order to be able to handle that, FHIR does everything asynchronously and moves into kind of a polling type of scenario. So it's going to tell you, hey, here's where you can go to find out how this job is going, how this export process is happening. And then you keep asking about it. And once I'm done, when you keep asking me, I'll tell you, oh, here's the file to go get. So it's going to tell you this content location of where to go to get the status updates, right? So you'll get back an HTTP request with a 202 accepted and a content location and the URL for the status or deleting request. In OpenEMR, that URL for us is going to be, it's going to go the FHIR API /API's default, whatever your site ID is. Maybe if you're a multi-site, it almost always is default, but if you're running this on multiple practices on multi-site, this will be whatever your multi-site URL is. FHIR and then this bulk data status, right? So that endpoint is where you're going to get told, here's where to go to get your status information, and it's going to give you a particular job ID, which in this case, let me just expand that. You can see here that it'll go to the bulk data status and it's the job, and you're given a particular job ID to say here's where I can get my status updates, right? So again, you make a query off to that status location, and it's going to return back to you whether it's done or not, the file generation status. So when you're going to get back a status update of the 202 accepted, FHIR can give you this X progress stuff, but we don't do that. We don't return a progress meter because it's hard to know how many records we have. We may add that in the future, but we'll also tell you a date, a timestamp of when to check back again. Okay, so you keep polling, and then once you get that content location, once it's told you that everything's good, you're going to be able to go and grab that JSON. So when you've got one, we'll go to an example here. So when you get back, when it's finished, you're going to get back a status 200, and that status 200 is going to include this information, assuming everything went okay. It's going to include the time. It's going to include where to go to download that document, or actually what was your original request, whether you need an access token to access. In OpenEMR, you always have to have an access token, so that will always be true. And then it's going to give you a series of URLs for you to go and download data, right? In our case, we generate just a single file. You could have multiple patient files, but we generate just a single one for each entity. So for patient, observation, encounter, immunization, allergy tolerance, you'd have a single file for each one of those. And then I know they say this is new in V2, but in US Core, we have to have a deleted one as well. So we actually include that also in our results. And then if there's any errors. So if we had any problems generating a patient result or an observation result, you're going to get also an operation outcome that you can go and download and figure out, well, this is what went wrong with FHIR. So that's what's going to get returned back in that status. Okay. And then you can go and grab that file. So again, you have to pass your access token on each one of those, and then it will return that FHIR resource. And that's how you go. Now let me show you. This is what the format of that file is going to look like, the ND JSON file. Okay, so you can see that they're trying to save, a few characters. But the reason why this also works is because it allows you to download this in chunks. Within a single HTTP request, you could get several records. And it helps you for streaming and for bandwidth considerations when you're dealing with a lot of data. So the ND JSON separates things by new lines and not by commas. Okay. And they did that because they wanted to. So as far as being able to initiate the bulk data export, there's a couple things for security that has to happen. So you're going to have to do some registration using the dynamic client registration, which I showed in a previous presentation. But you're going to have to go, let me just show an example here. You'll have to register a client. Here I'm just showing it via the API. You can see our other presentation if you want to see how to do it from the interface. But from the API, you're going to specify the different scopes that you need. In particular, OpenEMR is going to require that you have access to the bulk data status scope. So just to be aware, if you want to be able to call those operations, you need to have access to this one. Well, not, but it depends on which operation you're going to do. But for sure, you have to have access to this scope, and you need to also have access to the document reference scope and the document scope, which I'm surprised I'm not seeing that here. So you need to have access to that document scope. I may have it somewhere else, but in order to be able to download those files. If you don't have any of those three scopes, it's not going to work for you in OpenEMR. We don't support global scopes. So you may see in other examples of someone using like a system/star.star. That does not work in OpenEMR. We are very explicit. You have to use a scope. You can't get global privileges. You have to specify what is the data that you want when you do your initial registration. Now this stuff I'll jump to in a second, but so you have to register with a public key, okay? And that's where we talked about whether using a URL or whether using or embedding your keys. This is a public key that we're saying as part of our app. In OpenEMR, there are two different types of JSON Webkey cryptography algorithms that you can use. One is the ES384, and this one is the RS384. Those are the only two that bulk FHIR standard actually supports. In OpenEMR, we have the option of choosing which ones to support, and right now we currently only support the RS384. So when you're generating your private keys to be able to use inside of OpenEMR, it needs to be the RS384 algorithm. Now, there's a couple examples, and I'll jump to that in a second, but if you just want to get started and figure out, like, I don't know how to generate this JSON Webkey stuff, there are a lot of tutorials out there on the internet, but there is on this website, the bulk data smarthealthit.org. This is a tool that they've given you if you just want to get started of generating you can come here and it gives you the algorithm that you want, ES384 or RS384, and it'll generate that web key for you. The public key is on top. That's where this verify keyword is set here. And the private key is on the bottom. That's where this sign is. Now, I just want to mention, do not use this for production environment. You got to go and generate those keys. And I can't jump into this in this short time we have right now of how to generate that key. But this is an example. But again, don't use this in production because you have no idea if these people are saving off these keys or not. But for testing purposes, you can grab that key in your client registration, and you can put that key in here when you register, right? And you can specify that key and register your client that way. In this case, I'll just send off a registration request, and I get my unique client ID. Okay. So coming back to the presentation. So those token requests are signed, then they have to be signed with a private key, right? And I'll mention that you only have access, your access token is only good for 3 minutes. So let me show just as far as the process flow. So you're gonna register your client and send that off to our server, right? They're gonna give you a client ID. Then what you're gonna do as part of this process is, if you have an API client, and I'll show an example of that, you're gonna sign that token request with your private key, right? And then it's gonna give you back a short-lived access token. So let me just give you an example, and you can see the code for this. Let me go and grab the code right here. So this file, it's in, if you're looking to know how to generate this code for your own purposes in PHP, and the algorithm will be the same, so you can translate it to a different language. But this code is in source common command, create client credentials assertion command. And this will generate and do all the signing process of how to generate using that private key, how to convert your request to get an access token into a signed JSON web token that you then send to the FHIR server. And let me just show what that command looks like. We have it inside of OpenEMR as an example for you to be able to test with this. If I can get to the right file. Let's see, I want to go here. So inside of our bin directory in OpenEMR, we have this command runner, which is pretty cool because it shows you the different types of commands that we can run. And I'm going to run the create client credentials assertion. In this one, I need a client ID. So I'm going to jump here and grab this client ID here. Okay. Make sure I write this right. Okay. Then I need the URL for the access token, which is used for the audience command for our, I'm going to specify the URL to generate what is called my client assertion. And we're going to go there. Let's see if I typed it right. Okay. So this is the client assertion, right? This is the thing that I can then go in, and if I send into my access token, these are the different parameters. I'll do it on the curl in a second to show you how that works. But these are the things that have to be sent to my OAuth2 default token for a client credentials grant. So I'll send my grant type of client credentials, my assertion type, which has to be exactly this, the scopes that I'm wanting for my access token, and then my client assertion. And this can all be done programmatically. So once you've built it into your software, into your system API client, you can just redo this over and over again. So I would paste in my token right there, my assertion, and it will get me back a scope and an access token, which is only good for 3 minutes. Okay, see, it expires in 300 seconds. Same thing on this curl. If I want to do it here, I'm going to have to regenerate this. You can only run that command once. It keeps track of the assertion and won't let you reuse it. So if you want to, you'll have to regenerate a new assertion to run that curl command. And again, I've got my access token here. All right. So that's how you get credentialed and authenticated. Once you're authenticated, I'm just going to wrap it up in a few more minutes. We're going to go to our root export. So here I'm calling this FHIR export for everything in the system. I'm going to give my access token, and then I'm going to, you notice here, here's my accept. I specify application, FHIR JSON, prefer respond async. I'm going to hit send. And if I did that right, let's see, make sure I did that right. Oh, so let's go back here and do that access token here. Notice here in my example, I don't have the right permissions. So I'm going to come back here to my access token, and we'll do it here because I've got all the scope stuff specified there. I'm going to grab my assertion, put it in there, hit send, grab my access token, copy, come here to my root export. Let me go here to our bearer token. I'm going to send. Oh, let's make sure that we did that right. I think I forgot a step. Let me go here. And one thing, very important piece that I forgot to mention to you all, I'm sorry, is that you need to actually authorize your API client, because you can't just talk to the system without it being enabled. So we're gonna come back here, enable that, regenerate our assertion. Grab that. And here, my access token, and we'll get our access token. Okay. Now let's go to root export. Okay, it's not supposed to break on the presentation here. Let's see. Patient export. Let's see if that is different. Okay, well, so there's something wrong on the patient export. I'll have to figure out later what I did wrong there. So if we look at this 202 accepted, I've got my content location right here. If we look at it on the timeline, it's sending all this information in the GET request, and then it comes back with this HTTP 202 accepted, and with the content location header of here's where you can go for the status check. Okay. So we're going to go and grab that job ID, go to our export status, come here to our query, put in the job ID. You can see that this is what the query looks like. I need to again specify what my access token is, which will be the same one, as long as I do this within 3 minutes. Then preview. Now you can see here's all the URLs that you can go to. Let me expand that out. So it generated for the export status, right? For that patient export, that I generated all this data for allergy, intolerance, care plan, carotene, condition, device, and each one of those to be able to generate a file, right? In my case, I'm going to go to patient. I know that this is document 134. By the way, you have to have access, your user has to have access to that to be able to get it from a system permission. Let me go to, so here I can then come to that URL, whatever that URL was, right? I just grabbed that one because I didn't want to change the backslashes. Then I'm going to pass in my access token once again. Let's see. Go here to okay. If we've done this within 3 minutes, there's my patient data. Right. Notice that there's no brackets, but it's got all of that patient data there in the document, available to be used for the export. So I only have one patient. I guess I should have, for the example, done multiple, but that's all there. Let me look at, that's the preview. It made it look nice. but it's giving me a nicer preview, but this would all be on one line if it wasn't in my little editor thing. I went quite a bit over what I was thinking I was doing, but that's essentially the rundown. There is more here. I wanted to point you to another tool. Had it all working just about a half hour ago, but this is called the FHIR downloader, a bulk exporter, that will go through and simplify this. I had to fork it to modify it slightly so it works with OpenEMR, but I'm going to put this in the notes. You can go to this and install this via it's a node system that will go through. Let me just show right now, and I'll have this working sometime in the next couple days, but it's going to go through and it will download all of those resources that you have for you, so that you're not having to do this all manually. If you're not caring about building your own client, you just want to run an export from the data, like all the data. It has a couple different options, but there's a configuration file in here that you can play around with, where you'll specify your private and public key. That's there, your client ID, the FHIR URL that you want to go to, the token, and then the scopes that you need to authenticate with. And then it will go through and download all of those. Again, I had this working before, just before we started, but I'll make that work again. And let me put that into the chat for those who wanted access to it. And then that's all I have. I don't know if anybody wanted to, let's see, how do I get to the stop sharing? I don't know if anyone had any questions or wanted me to clarify anything. I know there's a lot. It was a high level overview. And let me give this presentation link too. I'm guessing, I guess we'll stop there then.
I do have a question, but mine is generic. It's not related to this topic. It's more about the installation of the software. So I was gonna wait until the end to ask.
Okay. Brady, do you want to stop recording?